Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another friendly edition of Fridays with Friends. Today's friend, an old friend, a longtime friend, Kathy Shea. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Craig.
Good to see you again. Kathy's been a practicing Raj Yoga, at least 25 years now. Am I right about that? More than that. And presently, she's the owner of I Am Inc., a consulting firm providing applied research, evaluation, and consulting for high-impact social programs. That seems very related to our subject matter of the day, called Harmonizing Relationships, which kind of came from my last week conversation with Marianne about the path of love. And this path of love is kind of like, you might think of it, a pilgrimage that we go on. And what's the one thing we always have on this pilgrimage is relationships. And the quality of the relationships makes the journey either sweet or bitter. So when you hear the term harmonizing relationships, what comes up for you?
Thank you, Craig. I took the liberty of looking back and noticed at some of your other recordings, your friends, and noticed that you've done more than 60 recordings over the past, couple of years. And harmonizing relationships has been the topic for a number of them. So this is obviously something that's of interest, and it was wonderful because I looked at the old recordings, and you did one with Vivek, and I'm trying to remember who you did the other one with.
Interesting.
But both of them said what I would have said. So let me reiterate what they said and what I'd say, which is, number one, you have to harmonize with yourself first. Everybody sort of agreed on that. And then secondly, Marianne mentioned last time, if I got it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, that love is an energy. It's not the kind of love that, like a romantic love or a feeling of love. It's an energy. And I would say harmonizing is the same thing. So we're still in the same ballpark, talking about an energy and first and foremost, harmonizing with yourself. So that's sort of the context that I'd like to take.
Wonderful.
And then maybe as we chat, I have a couple of ideas that we can bring something that's new to the conversation.
I think I would like you to go right to it. That when I see you're harmonizing, you think of love as being like the song, the music, and harmonizing is knowing what your place is in that chorus. And there's many instruments, there's voices, and it's all kind of going together. I always find that the one common denominator in all my difficulties in relationships is me. And
yes.
And so
yes, it's each of us, yeah.
And so there's where my focus has been, and it's so important. I think, would you agree that all your highest highs and lowest lows have something to do with relationships to others in this world we share?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But backing it up, and I guess on the path of Raj Yoga meditation, as we learn to spend more time with ourselves, it's also my relationship with myself that's problematic.
Yes,
with others.
Absolutely.
But it starts with me.
Okay, so now that we've narrowed it down to that, what are you're a consultant. What has your research into this about the self, relationship to the self, told you about your relationships and the quality of your relationships with others?
Yeah, well, I'm a study of one, just me. My sample is just me, so it's really just based on my experience. But because you're a dancer And you already mentioned the music and the harmony and all of that. Let's go into harmonizing from that point of view.
Wonderful.
So well, let me say from the music point of view first, because
Okay.
I'm certainly not anybody's dancer. It's like being, in one sense, a backup singer when you're in you said a chorus. Or it could be that you're, one of many, but you have your own part. And in relationships, talking first about, more intimate relationships, one-on-one, familial relationships, partnering relationships, that's even a more difficult thing than being part of the chorus. And so for me, when you're either dancing or singing and you're harmonizing, you're adjusting. Would you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. In fact, I was just having this conversation with someone who, owns a corporation where he maybe has 300 employees. And we got into that, the idea of dance, that it's not only that you're doing the action, like in athletics, you do an action and you practice it over and over. But in dancing, you're doing the same thing, but you also have to do it in a certain time. And then the really challenging part is, if you're partnering, is you have to do it with another human being and know what your place is at any certain time and stay connected with one another. And my experience in dancing is that all the most difficult things has nothing to do with the steps. That can be easily learned. The music is there and that can be learned, but it's always the challenge is in my ability to communicate effectively with my partner. And so it's the same thing as you brought up, whether it's music, whether it's dance, being a human being. What's your take and experience on
well,
that?
I always think about ice skating, figure skating.
Yes.
And when you were talking about the steps are there, it was in the old days in the Olympics, they used to have to do the compulsory moves,
Yes, I remember that.
little steps. But then there's and particularly in ice dancing now.
Right.
It's the expression. They have to do the moves. They still have to do all the required moves, but it's how they work together, interpret the music, interpret the story, and present, not just for themselves, but they're doing that on the world stage or for an audience or something. So there's this consciousness of being performing. I assume when you dance, if you're performing, it's not just for the two of you or for you.
Right.
Did you always dance with a partner, or did you dance?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very familiar with this whole idea. And so, okay, I'll say a couple words to you and you tell me how they relate. Observation. You think observation is a part of this process?
Absolutely.
Honesty.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Hard
we're,
to fake it, isn't it?
and well, that's what it is. We're so, okay, now I've got something that you may really relate to. I'm talking about in this observation, what I'm really trying to do, and whether it's a partner in a performance, or whether it's a relationship that I have with someone who's more intimate, or a coworker that I'm with all the time, the skill of listening really comes in. And so what can I do to become a better listener?
Just listen, I was going to say, without judging.
I don't know about you, but this is my experience, that trying to find out what the most important things are. And, the word love always comes up, happiness. But what I always have found that the most important quality that I can give another human being would be recognition.
Yeah.
And that's my experience in coming to learning to meditate and being in Raj Yoga, that meeting the people that are there that have done so assiduously working on themselves to remove the blinders that they've worn and habits that they've had through their lives. What really made me so impressed with the people that were there was I felt recognized in a way that I had never had before. What's your experience in that?
Sure, that was my very same experience. And Veronica, I think, wrote that on my card that I had said, what'd she say? I felt seen.
Yes.
I felt seen. And I guess that's recognized. But even before being recognized, it was being seen, I think is.
That's what I mean by recognized.
But you said a couple of things I want to toss back to you, and now I've lost my train of thought on. One of the elements of harmony or harmonizing, there's a lot of elements here, but one of them you mentioned, seeing people who have worked so assiduously on themselves to get themselves to a certain place. But harmonizing, I think you'd agree, doesn't mean I have to be just like them.
No.
Or I have to do everything that they do. And I think that's a stumbling block, particularly among people on our spiritual path.
Very good point.
And we try, like, we always talk about Daddy Janky. Well, who could be like Daddy Janky?
Yeah.
And she would just say, oh, it's easy,
Yeah.
But I think it's important to understand that it doesn't mean that we have to do everything everybody says or tells us to do. And it doesn't mean we have to be like everybody else. Because even though we're doing the same steps, we're doing the same dance, we're on the same path, we're not the same person.
No, it's we're not a dozen roses, but more like a bouquet. And then it's really an appreciation. And that's my experiences in dealing with everyone. In fact, that's the hardest people to get along with are the ones that are the most like you, because you can see what it is. And so there's another point that you just reminded me of it is what am I observing in the other person? Am I observing what's bothering me? Or am I observing a quality that they have that is new to me and makes me feel refreshed?
Yeah. Well, some would say I'm seeing a mirror. But in that observation, let me back this up a little bit for a moment. If anybody has had this experience, I know I certainly have, whether it's in a meeting or at a dinner or even in the family, when you have that sudden feeling, I don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I can't wait to get out of here. When will this be over? And it may not have anything to do with the other person at that point. We tend to project it. Oh, if, Uncle Bill wasn't so crazy, I could be here. But the observer, like you were saying, that ability to recognize, and this comes back to something Vivek said, actually. He had that lovely acronym about harmonizing was sacred, was the word, and it was an acronym, but the idea that the first element of the acronym was S for safety. And if we've had that experience of not feeling comfortable, or safe in a situation, then we tend to tighten up and want to get away. And if I observe myself doing that, I think this is a real opportunity to say deep within myself, take a pause and say, well, what am I feeling? Why do I want to get away? Why is this person triggering me? And my own experience is, particularly when we're talking about somebody else triggering us, my own experience is that there is some emptiness in me that I'm looking for that other person to fill, and they're not doing it.
I think you've hit it right on the head there, and that's exactly it. And it's so easy to project onto the other person. I don't even look at myself, it doesn't even enter my mind. That's why I shared earlier that I recognize that I'm the common denominator in all these different relationships. And it's so, another thing that Marianne brought up is about, people know how to press my buttons, but who is the creator of those buttons? So I was thinking that my task is to, one by one, remove these triggers that I've created that I didn't even realize it has to do with me.
That process of observing and taking the time to look, making that pause and looking, it's not a comfortable thing because we don't want to think it has anything to do with us. We're just pre-wired to look at the other person.
This is why that the adjective detached observer is so beneficial. And this is what meditation is. Meditation is the act of silence, which is what observation really is, where I can find a place where I really receive something that I don't need the expectation that causes that trigger. I have something to fall back on, because you can't not have anything. I mean, if you're lost, if you're not in a safe place, nothing at all can happen. Like you said earlier, nothing can happen. So I can create what I get from what you're telling me is I can create my safe place, and that allows me to observe parts of me that are no longer necessary.
Exactly. You put it better than I did. And here's the new element I want to inject in our conversation. I recently read a review of a book, and it's a study called Survival of the Friendliest. And it's a rebuttal to the survival of the fittest. And they talked about, a study that was done with dogs and wolves, dogs being the more friendly and dogs being more surviving evolutionarily, if you want to say that way,
yes,
as opposed to wolves. And some, breeds of wolves are virtually extinct. And they posit that it's because of their friendliness. Dogs are friendly. And so they actually, some researchers, education researchers, did a study in schools with little, elementary school kids, and they have what they called, like jigsaw. It's like they call it jigsaw time or something like that. But the recognition is that every person has a piece of the puzzle, but the whole is what they're trying to get to. And it teaches collaboration and cooperation and friendliness. And so they are posing the theory that Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest has been maybe one of the most damaging things to society that there ever was, in the sense that it valued aggression and fighting and overcoming each other. And it hasn't taken us, anywhere positive. And it's the basis for what I call othering, making.
I like it. Well, I don't see it as contrary. I see friendliness as being the fittest.
Exactly their point.
As we're personally evolving, we have to we're no longer surviving by hunting and gathering. We don't need to do anything physical. We could have a corporation within our own living room. All we need is a keyboard. We don't even need that. So it's changing, and then the more and more emphasis is put on friendliness, which kind of keys into what we see in society, that women are taking a more authoritative position, a more of a leadership position, because they've acquired this friendliness gene, this friendliness part of them more readily. And so they're well positioned for the next evolutionary step. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And that's exactly the point, that this is a big paradigm shift that we're talking about. And I'm offering friendliness as a key to harmonizing. But it starts with ourselves. And we've heard from our teachings and the daddies and other senior teachers who've said, be your own best friend. So how do we do that in a very conscious way?
It takes what comes to me immediately when I hear you say that is I need an awful lot of self-respect for myself, so that I can have the virtue of accommodating my weaknesses that I presently have without identifying as them, and to tolerate myself in the process of change. And then if I could do that, my relationships with everyone else is going to be so much easier, because I have natural empathy now, because I know we're all in this, going through the same process in different ways.
I couldn't agree more, Craig, and that tracks very nicely also with Vivek's his acronym. The second thing, first was S, safety. Second one was A for acceptance.
Yes.
And accepting myself. And here's where meditation comes in. It's I'm going to say this in a nice way. The culture that we live in now has not only come to value that sort of natural selection paradigm of Darwin, but also, and I think the recent bank failures is sort of symbolic of this, that the culture is one of being fast, being a disruptor, and sort of crashing things along the way. That's sort of been a good thing. And so it's very hard for people to stop long enough to reflect and allow oneself to even see what's going on inside.
So I have to, what comes up for when I hear you say that is, it makes me realize I have to redefine my definition of success. Because it's the end is how I feel. Really, success is how I'm feeling about my life and about me. That disrupting is not an original quality of the being. I disrupt the status quo by inserting something new, but the goal is not to disrupt. The goal is it's the opposite of harmonizing in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, but there is a value to disrupting. We have to disrupt my old habits.
That's true.
If I'm going to disrupt, let's disrupt that and open up the possibility for seeing things in a new way. We want to disrupt everybody else.
You sound like what reminds me of, you're saying in a very intellectual way, kind of a serenity prayer, that it's really I have to be able to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can. So it's the balance of that. And wisdom is knowing when to do which.
Well, you're keying right into Vivek's acronym, because the next thing was C, courage. Absolutely.
Well, it's things that are true are always true. It's always true. And in any case, what makes me want to argue with it is I don't want to necessarily accept my responsibility for where I position myself in that truth, because I identify with a more shallow version of myself. And without the observation of myself, i.e., meditation practice, I can't get there.
Yeah, I think that's That's the bottom line. In a very real way, I know for myself, when I'm like agitated about something, and I have a lot of opinions. I can't stop myself sometimes, but I really have to look at my resistance. Whatever I'm reacting to, I'm resisting something, and it's not about the other. What is my resistance? Where is that coming from?
Oh, that's a very mature outlook.
I don't know about that, but
Well, it takes a lot. It takes a lot. That's not something that's learned. You know that when you're 3, and if you're lucky, you can learn it before you're 83. But in between, we're competing. We're
yeah,
back to survival of the fittest, and it's really survival of the friendliest.
exactly. So how can, let's just say that I've changed my thinking about that, and I do believe in survival of the friendliness, even though it's just a new concept to me.
Yes.
How do I go about living my life expressing the fact that I do believe in the survival of the friendliness? How do I use that friendliness to develop my self-respect, to, be engaging with others in a positive way? How can I bring that to the field of action wherever I happen to be?
Well, the work is totally on myself, and I've always seen it as, we think of knowledge as being an addition. I'm adding something, but my own personal experience is that it's the opposite of that. It's about subtraction. I'm subtracting the old viewpoints because I'm starting with the premise that who I am at my core is this friendly, harmonizing, loving being. The same as the 3-year-old, like, you're in line to get a cup of coffee, and there's 2 guys kind of croaking at each other and very grumpy. And then a 3-year-old comes up to one of them and tugs him on the pant leg, says, "I like you." And suddenly he changes and he melts because of the innocent and the recognition of him as being worthy of being loved melted him in that instant. And so you've got to learn from the 3-year-old. And I find in my own life, it's the same, that when I do best in my relationships is when I'm innocent of any type of, what are they after? What's the angle? I just go in honestly and treat people honestly how I want to be treated. And even though they might think I'm a bit of a doof, it still works. It still works.
It's true. I was reminded, excuse me, I was reminded, I was at a physical therapy session recently, and there was this in the gym where we all, do our exercise.
Yes.
There was this toddler, and I see him. He comes for physical therapy. He's got some congenital, he has trouble walking. He can't be 2. He's not even really talking yet. And he's got the tiniest little weights on his ankles, and he's got tiny little walkers, tiny little things. And he is pure love. And everybody else in the gym is, oh, this is so hard. I'm sweating, complaining. And this little guy, he just like toddles down, and everybody lightens up. This whole room lightens up.
That's exactly my point. And so there's my harmonizing, as I see that an example of how that is. And then my question to myself is, how can I bring that in and take from that? Because I would like to be more like that, And so all my fanciful knowledge and my degrees aren't going to help me if it's causing me to be competitive with my cohorts.
Right. And this little child could disarm, I don't know, a dozen people,
You don't even have to tell me. I know exactly what it is. Yeah.
You could see it.
It's
Did you teach children when you were?
Yeah.
Dancing?
Mostly the people in their second childhood.
Second child, like me.
Yeah, well, because what I've realized is it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And here's an interesting fact is most of the issues that people have in learning that where they hit a plateau has to do with something that happened to them in childhood where they stopped growing. And so they still, if I'm expecting them to behave in a certain way, they don't know how to behave in that way because they still, whatever it was a trauma or whatever happened at a certain, that's where they are. And so I have to address that. So if it's something that they're for, I treat them as if they're for.
I'm glad you mentioned that because this is also part of the survival of the fittest mentality. And especially after during and after the pandemic, there's hardly anybody that hasn't experienced some loss, some trauma, some grief in their life, and recently. And so that element of feeling safe, and this is why, one of the things that we try and promote in the meditation centers, people should feel safe. They shouldn't come in feeling that they're going to be judged or criticized.
Right, absolutely.
So this element of feeling safe is so fundamental. And I have to feel safe with myself. And we have created a culture in which being mean, being bad, being abusive, being aggressive has become actually valued because of this thought.
It's a strange thing.
So if we can change the paradigm, it's very hard to be the biggest, the strongest, the baddest all the time. And
Right.
if that's how we're raising, particularly our young boys, if that's how we're raising kids, the long-term effects on that, physical effects we're beginning to see it on the immune system, on cardiovascular.
Oh, absolutely.
So forth.
Absolutely. There's probably more psychological and emotional problems with children now than ever before.
Yeah, than ever.
Which doesn't make sense in people are thinking of evolving and improving society. This tells you that something is not working. And so we have to readdress. And it's always going to come from a grassroots type of thing. It's each of us individually building and sharing, and with the eventually, when we reach that point of where it's the final straw, I'm looking for that term. I can't think of what that term is. Where that's where it happens. We have to keep going, and so one person at a time, one relationship at a time, one interaction at a time of offering what we're talking about. That I'm naturally friendly, naturally accepting. I'm looking for how to connect to you rather than how to show myself better or worthy, because I don't have enough self-worth.
Yeah, to change that, the paradigm really of separateness.
Yes.
To using friendliness. I might not want to love you. I might not even like you, but I think I could be friendly.
Absolutely.
And
it's a bridge.
It's a bridge. It's a good place to start. It's an easy thing to do. And it's one of those habits that I think we can begin to build. And how we've been focusing on accumulating. Well, accumulating the good wishes and the positive interactions will really benefit our whole society.
Absolutely. And that's the word I was looking for, is critical mass. Is I have my own personal critical mass that I have to, until it becomes absolutely natural for me, I have to keep working on it. And what happens is I see someone else is taking away from my critical mass, and that's why I get upset with them, but not realizing that's part of the process of developing. And boy, we've covered a lot of ground very quickly. and I'm sure we've gone over our time.
Ooh, sort of.
Can you any last words you want to share?
Well, we'll have to do it again because I want to address this topic of spiritual friendship, which is a
Okay, we'll do a part two.
whole other thing.
Well, yes, but look how long it takes to get there. And that's part of this process of developing the critical mass, is that we have to cover so much ground and then stay with it. And you can't really do it by yourself.
Right. And
You
that's
can't do
also
it by
part of
yourself.
the part of the conversation. What is mine to do? What's the role of introversion and reflection? And what's the role of engaging?
Well, well, what you're really talking about is the perfection of the spirit. That's what you're really talking about. And friendliness is an initial. Without that, nothing's going to happen. So it's the opposite of competition. It's really about connection. And
Yeah.
friendliness is one of the tools I use to connect to other human beings. So
And
thank
that's
you for
why
making
this
that
is
clear.
Friday with Friends.
Yeah, it's so true. You've got it all. So to close, why don't you take us into a meditation, kind of based upon what we've been tossing back and forth with one another, that kind of encapsulates the essence of what we're talking about, if you would.
Sure. A couple of minutes.
Yes.
Let's turn our attention within for the next few minutes and just follow the path of my breathing. I take a deep breath in, expanding my abdomen, filling the middle and then the upper tips of my lungs. And as I exhale, slowly and smoothly, I exhale all the way out. Again, I breathe in, filling my lungs with fresh, new air. And as I exhale, I remove and let go of old, stale thoughts and beliefs about who I am. For these next few moments, I believe I can become my own best friend. Even though my mind might be racing, and even though I may find it hard to concentrate, I may not be at my best, but I still accept myself and I love myself. Just hearing those words creates an inner smile in me. As the observer, I notice all the things that might distract me, divert me, or even attract me, and keep me wandering off the path that I want to follow. I realize how much easier it is when I'm friendly towards myself. I don't have to follow anyone's footsteps exactly. I keep myself on the path. I follow those who lead, but I stay with myself. Whatever I'm thinking and feeling now is temporary, and I can let it go. I can be silent. I can take 1 minute and allow the creative energy to express itself in me. How can I support myself? What can I do today, right now, to be a friend to myself? And let others see friendliness in me wherever I go. I take a moment to feel that energy. It's creative energy. It's very positive energy. The energy of being a friend. Accepting without judgment. Feeling safe. Observing. And as I rest in that energy, it has the potential to bring clarity and harmony to my mind, as well as every cell in my body. Om Shanti.
Thank you very much for that in particular, and for our whole conversation in general. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
And
It's always a pleasure.
I feel I've learned something, and that's always a wonderful thing. And it's just about putting what you've been talking about into action. Just by simple listening, I'm already connected to you when I'm listening, and then that recognition and validation between one another can only increase. Can't happen without being friends.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you, Craig. It's always great to see you.
I'll see you soon for part 2.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.
now.
Bye.
Bye.